Good afternoon. My name is J.C. Basinger. I'm the pastor of Hope Community Church. We are a church plant in Queen Creek. And this week we're going to be looking at the final week of Jesus' life before his resurrection. On Sunday, we talked about his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So we're going to pick up in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to look at a few key events. After Jesus is entered into Jerusalem, we see a event where he curses a fig tree. Then he cleanses the temple, and then we see the results of the fig tree. And this is what's called a sandwich in the Gospel of Mark. So Mark will oftentimes take a story, then he'll switch to another event, and then he'll complete the story. So let's look at Mark 11:15 through 19. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him. For they feared him because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. So the second temple was massive, and the Jews are coming, they're making a pilgrimage for Passover. And this massive temple had a court for the Gentiles, and then a smaller court for women, and then another court for the Israel men, and then another court for the priests, where they would do the sacrifices. So what's going on here is that the Gentiles' court has been turned into a zoo, and people are exchanging coins. And why they were exchanging coins is because the coins in this day and age had pagan symbols on them. So they would exchange coins for the proper coin to be used in the temple. And because these people were often poor and making a pilgrimage, they didn't bring animals with them. So for convenience, they would buy animals at the temple for sacrifice. Well, the problem was that they were charging surcharges for this service they were providing. So they were profiting off of people that didn't have a lot of wealth. Also, they were making the court of Gentiles into a bazaar, a zoo. Just imagine you're walking all this way, you're a converted Jew, and you're going to pray, but you have animals, noise, the refuse of animals, this commotion going on while you're trying to connect with God. So Jesus is overturning the tables, he's driving people out because of what he says. He says, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations." Notice that, all the nations, not just for the Jewish people, but for Gentiles as well. And the temple was meant to symbolize God's presence. And Israel was meant to be a light to the nations. But clearly they're not doing that. So what does Jesus do? He overturns tables. He casts people out. Now notice also, Mark concludes in the next section, "As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered, and he said to him, 'Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered.'" What's Mark communicating here? Mark is saying that Jesus is enacting a parable. That Jesus is not only cleansing the temple, but he's also depicting destruction. And historians note, and we know, that the temple was destroyed by the Roman army in AD 70. Well, why is that significant? Because the age of the temple is done. Jesus talks about himself being the temple. We see this in John chapter 2, where there's another example of the cleansing of the temple, but John chapter 2 says this. Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. So there's no need for the temple that was destroyed in 70 AD to be rebuilt because Jesus is the temple. You know what's even more significant? Maybe not more significant, but also significant, is that now the church, with the presence of Jesus, is the temple. Look what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? So Jesus is the temple and we are part of his body, so we as a church are also his temple. Temple symbolized God's presence. God is present with his church. So how do we respond now? How do we live that out? Well, we live it out as a light to the nations. As the people of God, we seek to make Christ known. And we do this in two ways. We do it through gospel proclamation, where we tell people who God is. We tell people the good news of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ is King, that he has accomplished victory over sin and death. But we also do it through demonstration, where we live out God's presence and we participate in what God is doing. So we seek to be a blessing to our neighbors and a blessing to our enemies. We find ways to love them in tangible ways to demonstrate who God is, that God is a God of love, that God is a God of mercy, that God is a God of grace. This is part one of a week-long series we'll be doing in Jesus' final week. So we'll go Monday through Saturday. Hope you're doing well. I pray that your Holy Week reminds you of our need and you of your need of Jesus Christ. And I will see you tomorrow.